Look in every week at your newsagents, just 10p.
Hello and welcome to this retrospective look at what's inside another classic publication from our dim and distant childhood memories. I'm Retro Steve UK and this is the Look In television annual from 1979, featuring comic strips, puzzles, pin-ups and features on a wide selection of TV programmes, personalities and pop stars of the time. In this video we'll be taking a detailed look inside page by page and in high definition so you can pause at any time for a closer inspection. And remember, you can jump around to different parts of the book and indeed the entire video by using the chapter markers that I've placed along the timeline. So let's travel back in time now to 1979 and see what's new and exciting in the wonderful world of vintage television. The book contains 80 pages, starting with page 1, the front cover, which features a montage of images designed to draw you in with a visual overview of some of the contents. We got the Fonze, John Travolta, the Battlestar Galactica spaceship, Elvis Presley, John Lloyd, Charlie's Angels and Benny Hill. Inside the front cover is a double spread picture of the actors from the late 70s TV adaptation of Enid Blyton's Famous Five, without Timmy the dog, although they are having cuddles with 4 puppies for some reason. Notice also the price tag in the bottom right, £1.45. If you want to buy an annual these days, you'll need to shell out at least a tenner. On pages 4 and 5 we're introduced to the obligatory legal and publishing information and a very plain looking contents page. Does the job though, and provides a neat list of what to find and where in the book, divided into categorised sections. There's also a credit at the bottom for the front cover artist, Arnaldo Puzzi, who passed away in 2012 at the age of 85. He was a painter, well known for his work on film posters from the 1950s onwards. A 6-page feature begins on pages 6 and 7. Heavens Above covers TV shows and movies in the sci-fi genre, including Superman, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the Star Wars movies, Battlestar Galactica, Spider-Man, Doctor Who, Star Trek, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Buck Rogers and Sapphire and Steel. There are also quick references and comparisons to older shows and films throughout the article, like War of the Worlds, Planet of the Apes and The Time Tunnel. Smile with Stewpot on pages 12 and 13 is one of a number of joke and cartoon pages. Ed Stewpot Stewart was a BBC radio DJ and children's TV presenter on programmes like Crackerjack and Top of the Pops. He had regular slots in Look In magazine for almost 10 years during the 1970s. Page 14 marks the start of a 4-page article on John Travolta, covering his life and career. It includes some quotes from the man himself and a selection of shots from various on-screen appearances. What can I say about Benny Hill? A controversial figure by today's standards, but in the politically incorrect climate of the 1970s, he was a superstar. You have to question the inclusion of an adult humour comedian in a children's comic, but believe it or not, the Benny Hill show was considered family viewing back then. In this comic strip, Benny plays the part of his cousin Stan, who becomes a superhero and uses his powers to chase after girls. On pages 20 and 21 we're treated to some puzzles. Foreign Frolics is an international culture quiz inspired by the TV show Mind Your Language. On the right there's a Spot the Difference featuring 2 almost identical pictures of the Boomtown Rats, with 10 differences to find. The answers for both are helpfully included on each page, printed upside down of course to avoid inadvertently cheating. The ever-lovely Joanna Lumley gets a feature on pages 22 and 23, with a big old picture of her front and centre, and a short article down the right-hand side about her life and career. Join the Club on pages 24 and 25 is literally a list of addresses you can write to inquire about joining fan clubs, along with some interview quotes on the left page from some of the people who run those clubs. Seems weird now in a modern world where personal address information is generally kept private, thanks to internet weirdos, but here it is. So if you want to join the ABBA fan club, for example, just send a letter off to 2 Sheep Street in Swindon, or if you're that way inclined, just turn up in person and freak out whatever poor sod lives or works at that address. Awesome. Classic 70s band Boney M gets a feature on pages 26 and 27. Some nice on-stage photos of Liz, Marcia, Bobby and Maisie, and a column on the right covering some of the details of their rise to success in the late 1970s. Another 2-page Smile with Stewpot feature on pages 28 and 29 gives us another selection of cheesy 1970s humour in the form of jokes and one-liner comic strips. Pretty basic humour, but as a youngster in the 1970s, these probably would have been hilarious. A 4-page spread between page 30 and 33 covers the booming world of tennis and Britain's place on the worldwide sporting stage, with info covering some of the bigger tennis personalities from the time, including Virginia Wade, John Lloyd, Sue Barker, John McEnroe and Bjorn Borg, amongst many others. Pages 34 and 35 bring us a feature on the actors from the 1978-79 TV show based on Enid Blyton's Famous Five. Julian, Dick, Anne and George are played by Marcus Harris, Gary Russell, Jennifer Thanish and Michelle Gallagher, respectively. And the very cute Timmy the dog was played by Toddy the Border Collie. A massive 10-page Space 1999 comic strip starts on page 36. The short text intro explains almost apologetically that although the TV show is quite old now, it is still regularly shown on TV, and that this is another chance to read the comic strip that appeared in Look-In a few years ago. So it's a reprint, and possibly a way to fill extra pages, but here it is regardless, in all its vintage glory. Space 1999 was a science fiction show produced by famed puppet master Jerry Anderson and his wife Sylvia. Unlike his other puppet-based TV shows, this one was live action, with real actors on screen. The show ran from 1973 to 76 and was set in a scientific research centre on the Moon. A nuclear waste explosion on the far side of the Moon propels it out of Earth's orbit and into space. And this is the premise of the show: the stranded inhabitants of Moonbase Alpha experiencing adventures in space, with the Moon acting as their makeshift spaceship. The Benny Hill Fund continues on pages 46 and 47 with pictures and an article about aspects of his personal life. The On the Ball feature on pages 48 and 9 discusses the lives and managing styles of various football bosses, including big names like Jack and Bobby Charlton, Brian Clough and Argentina's Cesar Luis Menotti. The football theme continues on the next 2 pages with pictures of Osvaldo Ardiles and Kevin Keegan. These are listed in the contents as pinups, which would have been fine in the Look-In magazine, but the pages of this book don't really lend themselves easily to being ripped out. So if you were desperate for a picture of either of these 2 beefcakes on your wall, you'd have had a bit of a challenge on your hands with maybe a sharp knife or a pair of scissors. Smile with Stewpot gets its next entry on pages 52 and 53 with another selection of single-image cartoon puns and question and answer style jokes. A double-page Blondie feature on the next 2 pages with a couple of columns of text on the right covering the band's history and a full-page image of their lead singer Debbie Harry on the left. And there's a small tear at the bottom of the page here, so it looks like someone may have tried to tear out the page to use as a pin-up, but aborted after the page started to rip awkwardly. A curious article on page 56 and 7 called They Weren't Kidding celebrates 1979 being the International Year of the Child, with words about some famous figures from the past and present and their experiences as children. Some of the celebrities mentioned include footballer Trevor Francis, tennis player Chris Evert Lloyd, and more historical figures like Mozart and Shakespeare, and also one of the most well-known historical child stars, Shirley Temple. The article has some interesting things to say about the rights of children, and how those rights have become more important over the years. Richard O'Sullivan gets a feature over the page with info about some of the TV shows he'd been in, like Doctor in Charge, Man About the House and Robin's Nest. The article mainly focuses on his latest role as Dick Turpin in the TV show of the same name, which was first broadcast that year in 1979. It's puzzle time on pages 60 and 61 with Stewpot's Crossword on the left page and a sports quiz on the right, with the answers to both printed upside down in the bottom right of each page. And you can see here the first evidence of the original owner's influence, with answers filled in on the pages with a green felt tip pen. Kind of a shame for collectors, but if you're not fussed about having old books like this in pristine condition, the filling-ins can be quite charming, and in this book there's plenty more to come, so brace yourself for that. Universal Appeal on pages 62 and 63 details the rides and attractions for visitors and holidaymakers that can be experienced at Universal Studios in Los Angeles. Back then there were attractions based on big TV shows and movies of the time, including Jaws and The Bionic Woman, and the place is still there today, currently in 2024 offering attractions based on Jurassic World, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire and Nintendo's Super Mario Bros. Recipes on pages 64 and 5 in the Party Pieces feature, with a selection of cakes and foods you can create to impress your party guests, and as well as the recipes there's also a helpful list in the bottom right of 10 tips you can follow to help your party go with a swing. The highlight for me here is tip number 8, which emphasises the importance of having someone look after the record player. Nothing worse at a party than having rowdy guests stumbling about and making the record needle skip. Elvis Presley gets a tribute over the page here, and a hand-drawn moustache, in an article that briefly details his earlier life and how he found fame. He died 2 years earlier in 1977, and he was always a massive star all around the world, so his inclusion in the annual here would have still felt fairly topical, even though the bulk of his career had mainly spanned the 1950s and 60s. The next entry here for Smile with Stewpot, with another selection of, well, let's face it, pretty naff jokes by today's standards. Having said that, the hungry horse joke on the left page did give me a little chuckle. Empty Gigi? I'll get my coat. A 4-page feature on 1970s action TV show Charlie's Angels begins on page 70 with a picture of the ladies themselves, with more of that felt-tipped artwork as well, and an article about how the show began and details about its production. The article and images continue over the page, again with even more creative felt-tip work from the original owner of the book, and we get further info and details about the show's production and the experiences of the various actors. One of my favourite childhood actors from the 1970s, Henry Winkler, aka Fonzie from Happy Days, gets a 3-page article starting here on page 74. Coolamundo was one of the many iconic phrases uttered on the TV show by Arthur Fonzarelli, which sounds cheesy when you read it now, but not coming from the mouth of the uber-cool Fonzie himself. Even if he'd admitted to spending his weekends train spotting, he still would have sounded cool saying it. That was the nature of the Fonz. He has always been the epitome of coolness. The Fonzie article began by primarily covering Henry Winkler's stint on Happy Days, but concludes here on page 76 with more info about his life and ongoing career. The book concludes with a final look at Richard O'Sullivan's appearance as Dick Turpin, with an opportunity on page 77 to have a guess at what Dick Turpin is saying as he takes a bath in a big wooden bathtub. An admirable effort here from the wielder of the green felt-tip pen, which I won't quote out loud, but you can very clearly read for yourself. Bravo, Phantom Felt Tipper, bravo. The inside back cover then treats us to a double-page image of a production scene from Richard O'Sullivan's Dick Turpin TV show, explaining that there were a lot of skilled technicians on set. And finally, the back cover finishes off with a repeat of the image from the front cover, only this time without all the additional text getting in the way. So that was the 1979 edition of the Look-In TV Annual. I bought this on holiday this summer from a junk shop in Glastonbury. It wasn't actually priced up, so the shop owner literally pulled a price out of the air and said £4. And obviously I couldn't say no to that, so now we can all enjoy a flick through via the magic of YouTube. These annuals can be picked up on eBay currently for around a £5, and they're not particularly rare, so if you want a copy for yourself, that will be where to go. I plan to cover more retro publications like this now and again, so if there are any old magazines and such that you'd like covered in a video, feel free to mention them in the comments. I'm always open to suggestions, and I'll happily add your requests to my brainstorm list for future consideration. I asked for your memories of any items in this book, or about Look-In in general, and here's what some of you had to say. Tony Weaving used to buy Look-In from about 1976 at age 13. He shared a bedroom in a children's home in Cheltenham with his friend Stephen, and they used to stick pin-ups from the magazine on their bedroom wall. Bryn Probert loved Look-In during the 80s and thought it was great for kids to have their own magazine. Bryn points out that the old magazines historically are a great repository of culture, and as for this edition, he spotted Battlestar Galactica on the cover and has some nice things to say about the show. He also mentions the influence that Star Wars had on sci-fi shows like this. Colin Murphy remembers running to the newsagent in 1975 because there was a free Kung Fu TV show medallion in that week's edition of Look-In. Unfortunately, it was sold out when he got there. Gutted. Andrew Mills never missed a copy of Look-In as a kid, but he doesn't remember the annuals. He likes to spot copies of the magazine in scenes from TV shows like Open All Hours, where you'd often see relics like that from the past sitting on shelves and shop displays. Gary Hunt remembers having this specific annual. David H, aka @Lord Tuapenny, looked forward to every issue but never had the annual, and doesn't remember seeing it in the shops. He remembers the pin-ups and removing entire pages to put up on a bedroom wall. He loved the weekly serialised comic strips that were based on TV shows and thinks the artwork that went into them was brilliant. Seeing a copy of Look-In now always cheers him up. Cool Hand Luke explains that this annual was a bit before his time and that he started buying Look-In a few years later. If I'm honest, it's pretty much the same for me. I was too young to appreciate this 1979 annual, but I very clearly remember all the TV shows featured in it, and that's the nostalgia for me in this case. Mr. Monk, aka @Monk1Love, thinks Kevin Keegan as a pin-up is hilarious. Andrei Tupolev points out the potentially inappropriate nature of Benny Hill in a comic strip. Ooh, misses. And finally, Emma6641 obviously remembers the catchy tune from the 1970s Look-In TV adverts as she recites some of the lyrics in her comment. If you remember those adverts, stick around as I'll be putting one in at the end of the video. If you have any thoughts or memories to share about any of the contents of this book or about Look-In in general, post them in the comments below and we can chat about it there. And if you want to be featured in a future Retrospectives video, follow me on my various social media platforms where I'll be asking for comments whenever I'm working on something new. And if you like what I do on this channel, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee tip jar where you can say thanks with a small gesture. You'll find all the links in the video description. We're going to finish off now with a TV advert for Look-In magazine from the same time period as the book we've just looked at. But first I'd like to thank everyone who shared their comments, to thank you for liking and subscribing, and of course to thank you all for watching Retrospectives.
Look in every week for action with the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. Look in for the adventures of the Famous Five and get out of this world with Logan's Run. Look in for non-stop fun with Benny Hill, Doctor on the Go, Stewpot's News Desk, and big prize competitions. Look in for great colour pin-ups and news and features from the world of pop and the world of sport. Look in every week at your newsagents, just 10p.